Another Saturday night in front of the TV, clicker in hand, looking for an action-adventure movie I've seen at least twice before. This was what my once fulfilling life had become, a boring routine. Maybe that was a problem. I had become boring. Sure, there were other reasons. God knows I'm not the best-looking guy around, and certainly not the wealthiest. I've always been quiet and laid back, so it's easy to imagine why she might have found me dull. But that wasn't always how it was. At first, we hung out with friends who liked to party. We partied quite a bit. We both enjoyed drinking and smoking pot, but we steered clear of anything harder. My buddies were always flirting with her. She liked the attention, and as far as I know, nothing ever went too far. Life was easy back then. We knew how to relax. Later, some of the other wives started to feel a little jealous of her. Julie had an attractive figure, a nice rack, a thin waist, and a beautiful butt. Even after having 2 kids, she still flirted and enjoyed the attention. Some of the wives felt threatened by her, but they still liked her. Everyone liked her. As the kids grew older, our lives became busier and more routine. I probably could have planned more date nights, but I was working long hours. I was making decent money, and we were living comfortably in the middle class. Julie was an active parent, involved in all the school activities, while I worked 50 to 60 hours a week. I was proud of my family. They treated me well, and I did my best to be there for them, even though much of the responsibility fell on Julie's shoulders. It's often said that sometimes life just happens to you, and it sure felt like that was the case for me. One minute, Julie, my friends, and I were sitting on the floor of our tiny third-floor apartment, and the next, we were in the suburbs, hosting a pool party for our youngest son's high school graduation. How did this happen so quickly? And now, my youngest is starting middle school. I remember that weekend clearly because it was the very next day that Julie told me she was going back to work at her old law firm. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 16 years, and now, at age 40, she was going back as an assistant to her former mentor. When did this happen? I asked. We never discussed you going back to work. What about the kids? The kids? Really, Michael? She replied. The boys don't need me around anymore, especially now that David has a car. He knows he has to drive his little brother around for errands, or he'll lose the car. I need to do something. I'm going crazy just sitting around. She continued. I mentioned it to Marie a few weeks ago at her last event, and she must have said something to John. He called last week and asked me to come over to talk. He introduced me to Ian Rogers, and we all went out to lunch. You never told me you'd met John and Ian. I never thought they'd actually hire me. Hell, I'm a mom, not a sheriff's deputy. She laughed softly. After lunch, we went back to John's office, and I sat with his deputy for a couple of hours. Alice is a few years older than me, but she's very savvy. My computer skills are still pretty good, and she said the rest was just controlling his calendar. Julie paused, looking at me nervously. I don't know if it was Marie pushing it, but on Friday, John and Ian offered me a job for a 90-day probationary period. I'm nervous and excited at the same time. I was hoping you'd be more supportive. Are you okay with me taking the job? Well, no, I replied, still processing. I think you just shocked me with it. It's so unexpected. When are you going to start? And that was the beginning of our end. It had only taken handsome young Ian 17 months to fall in love with Julie and convince her to go with him when he was courted by a large firm in London. I'm sorry, Michael, she said softly. I never meant for any of this to happen. We fell in love. He's moving to England, and I'm going with him. I've explained it to the boys. They're not happy with me, of course, but it can't be helped. I'm leaving you everything, except for my clothes and jewelry. It was the shock of a lifetime. I was stunned into silence. I sat there, frozen in my chair, tears suddenly rolling down my cheeks as she paced back and forth, wringing her hands. I struggled with my feelings for him for months before I gave up. I tried to avoid a public scandal by behaving very carefully. I'm sure all our friends will be shocked when they hear about what happened when it becomes public knowledge. I found my voice, and I couldn't hide my sarcasm anymore. Oh, that's very kind of you, my dear. Oh my God, Michael. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You're a wonderful person, and I still love you deeply. You just don't love me anymore, do you? She hung her head, took a deep breath, and said, I'm sorry, but I have to go with him. Goodbye, Michael. I sat in silence, watching as the cab driver carried her bags to the car. Funny thing is, I didn't even notice how they ended up at the door. For years later, I turned and looked at the same door when the quiet tinkling of the doorbell echoed through the house. Then I heard the pounding of knuckles on the large wooden door. I looked at the clock. 8:30. Who could be interrupting at this hour? I walked over to the door and opened it, just enough to see 1.5 meters beyond it. Hey, Michael, she said. I know this must come as a shock, but I'm back. I came home to you. I stared into the face of my ex-wife, the mother of my children, the former love of my life. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in 4 years. The lawyers had drawn up all the paperwork, and the signatures had been collected. True to her word, she had given me everything. It was all quickly consumed by the university my sons had chosen to attend. She had cut her long blonde hair short, and I noticed a little gray at her dark roots. She had a few more wrinkles and had lost some weight, but she still looked beautiful. Behind her, on the walkway, was a pile of bags and a bag hanging from her shoulder. Her dark blue skirt matched her heeled shoes, and her white blouse was open enough to show off her impressive cleavage. She smiled broadly at me. Do I know you? She recoiled in shock. Michael, don't be silly. Do I know you? I repeated. Of course you do. It's me, Julie. I've come home. Please, Michael, let me in. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is not your home, and I don't know you. Her mouth dropped open, and for a moment she was silent. Then she nodded. Okay, Michael, I can see you're still mad at me. I guess I can't blame you for that, but please let me in. We have so much to discuss. I'm sorry. I can't let you in. I don't know you. I realized that 4 years ago when you stood in front of me, confessed your love for another man, and walked out of my life. Now, I'm missing a very interesting part of my movie, so please excuse me. If I hear from my sons, I'll let them know you stopped by. I closed the door and returned to my chair. I had to turn up the volume on the TV to drown out the banging and squealing outside the door.